Foreign ministers of G20 nations have gathered in New Delhi to discuss key concerns for the member nations. Talking about what's going to be on the agenda, India's Foreign Secretary, Mr. Vinay Quatra, said that multilateralism, counter-terrorism, food and energy security are some of the things which will be deliberated over by the member nations in this meeting of foreign ministers. Late last night, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in India. His Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, Chinese foreign minister, and other European foreign ministers are already in India. And given what happened in Bengaluru, where the member nations failed to issue a joint communique, India will be ensuring that some sort of consensus emerges out of this meeting. Will India be able to succeed? To discuss it, I'm joined by Dr. Subhash Chandra Pandey, former advisor to the Ministry of Industry and Commerce. He's also the president of the Institute of Public Auditors of India. Thank you for joining us, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Prime Minister addressed the foreign ministers and he underscored the fact that, quote him, "You're meeting at a time of deep global divisions. We should not allow issues that we cannot resolve together to come in the way of those we can." Now, of course, this has happened after the meeting in Bengaluru failed to issue a joint communique. Where do you think this is headed?
You see, the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine has overshadowed G20, and what Prime Minister was mentioning, that the multilateralism is in danger, and referring to that this conflict it should not hamper progress in achieving something that is of concern to the wider community of developing nations. The unsustainable debt burden, the problems of food and energy prices shooting up, inflation. So, can we find within the or while the conflict is going, what is that we can do while these differences remain the political? Because G20 essentially was an economic grouping. Of course, economics and politics are intertwined in a significant manner, and particularly today's fractured world, where the erstwhile unipolar world after the USSR disintegration has becoming bipolar or biaxial at least. Right. So, the Prime Minister's message is clear that while the conflict and its shadow looms large, what is that we can do? Because in this conflict there are dozens of other countries which have no part in this thing, and they are suffering.
Right. And don't you think Russia and America both, of course, Russia, China combined and America both, along with, of course, Europe, have been a little too adamant when it comes to the positions that they have taken on Russia-Ukraine war. And as a consequence, there are several other things that have to be discussed. There is multilateralism, there is counter-terrorism, there is narco-terrorism, food and energy security, so on and so forth. Yeah. Issues which are of key concern for everybody. But because of this, nothing is getting discussed. And to what extent can India push to sort of, make sure that a consensus emerges?
On that front, I think I am optimistic on this score that fortunately both US and Russia would not like India's presidency of G20 to fail or to be seen as having achieved little. All right. Both have a stake in that, and so that we can expect certain minimum programs to emerge, whether it is debt relief, whether it is a humanitarian assistance, whether it is something to do with food and energy security, something will come out, because both and the wider international community.
So, what can India look forward to gaining from this presidency?
One is that under the watch of India's presidency, we can find certain, evolve certain framework of international cooperation, which will provide relief to the wider community of developing countries, which are under the unsustainable debt burden. Inflation, to cool down the inflation raging in many countries and raising the cost of living them. And in the post-pandemic revival of economic activity. So, all these are which are far away from the political dimension of this conflict. These are some things which are achievable in the common.
India has invited a bunch of friendly countries to India and has ensured that they also participate in certain meetings. But what can the developing world look forward to?
You see, the developing world
Because the developing world is suffering. I mean, every time Russia, Ukraine, US, Europe do not sort of, agree over issues, fuel prices rise, food prices rise. And as a consequence, the part of the world which suffers the most is the developing world.
and that suffering directly from this conflict translates into macroeconomic instability through the mechanism of inflation and interest rates.
Right.
You see, when the prices shoot up, the inflation is running high. Then to fight inflation, the central bank try to raise interest rates, and when the interest rates rise, all the indebted countries, they feel the pinch of it, because debt servicing takes away bulk of their resources, and which cannot otherwise would have gone for developmental expenditure or providing social security and relief. So, today if you see from 60s onward, today the world has reached where the whole world is sort of a governments and individuals, they are living on debt. Almost official reported debt is about $250 trillion, whereas the global GDP is about 96, 97 trillion dollars. So, it is almost 2.5 times. So, with this if it were small, it can absorb the interest rate fluctuation. The bigger the debt stock, the bigger is the problem.
Right, which is why the Prime Minister about a week ago referred to the fact that international financial institutions are losing credibility.
Yes, yes. Because the Bretton Woods institutions, notably World Bank and IMF, which were created after Second World War, they first of all, as from this delinking of dollar and gold standards, it had a big impact on Bretton Woods institutions. But subsequently also their level of assistance to developing countries has not been very significant compared to what some other countries have done on a bilateral basis.
Right.
So, when Prime Minister says multilateralism is in danger, it is a pointer to the fact that the World Bank, IMF are not doing as much as they should.
But India has a special stake in this, because if you look at India's neighborhood, I mean, Pakistan's struggling now. Sri Lanka has been struggling for a while. And I mean, if you look at all of these countries around us, then there is, of course, Afghanistan. So India does have a special stake in this.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And that is precisely I was alluding to when I said like Pakistan is struggling for meeting IMF conditionalities for just $1 billion.
Right.
So, Sri Lanka went through a very serious crisis.
And India did the heavy lifting.
India did the heavy lifting. So, fortunately, we are today in a position to do the heavy lifting. We have left behind the crisis of 1991, when we ourselves had less than $1 billion in our kitty.
Right.
We pledged gold to avoid default. So, from 91 to 2023, we have come
a long way.
We have a foreign exchange reserve, we have a prudent fiscal policies, we have better macroeconomic stability. So, India is a much better place to handle the crisis, but it's still dented. Problems are there for it, because it is a large country.
Yeah, the GDP numbers were out for the third quarter, a day before, and the GDP growth has slowed down to 4.4%. But that aside, let's keep the focus on G20. So, what are some of outcomes that you foresee, coming as a consequence of these deliberations?
As I said, in terms of one could be the humanitarian assistance for totally distressed countries in terms of access to food and energy. So, what can be mechanism could be evolved, say humanitarian corridor. Ukraine has been a basket for major basket of food export, which has been disrupted by war and the supply line. So, can in the midst of this conflict, can there be a corridor for uninterrupted supply of food for the distressed countries? So that something that would require an agreement. And more importantly, for a longer term is the extending further finances and debt relief, debt restructuring. So there could be, we could look forward to conditional debt relief, that if you do this in return for doing this, for example, debt for climate or debt for health or something. Right. So if you do this, if a debt is cancelled and you save some resources, you promise to commit that much resources for particular desired activities, not for something which is frowned upon by international community.
All right. On that note, thank you for talking to us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.